Good afternoon, everybody. This is Steve Wilson at the Illinois State Water Survey, and I'm here with Jennifer Wilson from the Water Resources Center. And today we are presenting a webinar on how to find local information about your well. This is part of a series of webinars that are in support of privatewellclass.org and the Private Well Class program that we're working on with RCAP, and is supported by RCAP and funded through US EPA. And so we're just going to begin. We received a lot of questions prior to the webinar, and we'll try to get to those as well today. And so I'm just going to get started. Quickly, an overview of what we're going to do. I'm going to mention the private well class and what it is, what we're covering today, and logistics for using GoToWebinar if you're not familiar with it. Then we'll go through the material for today and sum things up at the end, and then again get to the questions. So it should be pretty straightforward. So the private well class, and I'm bringing this up today, we had a lot of questions in the last month or so related to some of the basics of what our class teaches about sampling wells and how often and some of those things. And when we first started this class, there were issues with folks finding the webinars but not actually finding the materials. And the webinars are just meant to support the class. The class is online, it's 10 lessons, it's self-paced, and I'll walk through this, but you sign up and they're mailed to you via email once a week for 10 weeks. And I want to make sure that everyone who's on the webinar is taking the class or has taken the class. If not, there's a lot more information there, a lot more detailed, and a lot better guidance than what we can do in the short time we have today. So for instance, today about local resources, this is really part of one lesson, lesson 7. And so I hope what we provide today gives you some insight. So when you read through that material, if you're not to lesson 7 yet, it will help you understand where we're coming from. And there's a URL, privatewellclass.org. Again, when you sign up, there's a place to enroll in the class. And if you haven't started the class, it's not a big deal. You can start any time. Again, it sends you a lesson once a week for 10 weeks once you started. We've had over 3,300 people sign up so far, and since January of 2013 from all 50 states and a bunch of countries, and so that's a positive thing. And so if you have any questions or issues with those materials, email us. On the web page there is a email link, and there's also a phone number. Here's the front page, and this big box where it says click here to enroll, that's where you enroll. And once you've done that, you can see at the bottom here there's an email address and a phone number. But once you click on this box, it takes you to this page. We just need an email address. We ask for your first name and the state, should be state or territory you live in, and that's to help us show our sponsor the kind of coverage we're getting around the country and what kind of issues folks are having as far as who's signing up because of where. And so today's webinar, we are recording it, and so we'll make it available on our website and YouTube. We're pretty small staff and we're a little behind. We've done 2 webinars so far with this current round of funding, and we haven't put them up yet, but they should be up fairly soon. The questions we get today, as I'll go through this here, there's a message box and a question box on your GoToWebinar screen. You can ask questions there. Jennifer is going to make a list of those as we go through and as I go through the material, and at the end we'll try to answer those questions after we've answered all the questions that we've gotten previously. Folks had till October 21 to sign up with any questions they might have. And again, I just want to mention, this is a quick run through some of this information. There's a lot more material in the class lesson that'll give you the details from what we're talking about today. Here's the window just to show everybody what we're talking about. If your question box is just a narrow bar that has a plus sign, if you click on the plus sign, it makes it this big box where you can ask the question. So, getting local help. The idea behind our class and all the webinars we're doing are to educate and motivate well owners to understand why their well is important and to help them become better stewards of their water supplies. We're in one location. We're at the University of Illinois in Champaign, Illinois, and we can't answer a lot of specific questions about geology or particular well issues because of a naturally occurring contaminant and things like that all over the country. We are learning because of the success this has had, but our best advice is to help you understand where these local sources of information are and why it's important that you know those folks. You should know who's at your county health department if you have a private well, and you know that's your tribal health department. We aren't going to have all the answers, but hopefully we can give you some tools to help you ask better questions when you do need help, and understand why you need to know the things we feel you should know. So getting local help, it really is local. The best support you can get is as local as possible. Someone who knows your resources or is familiar with your wells. Those folks that know your regulations and the local conditions, and that's generally first would be your well contractor or your county or tribal health department, then well and driller regulators, so your state agency if they regulate well construction or drillers licensure in your state. Other sources, co-op extension throughout most of the country. If a county co-op extension agent can't provide you with help, some of their regional or state staff probably can, and so they're here to help you as well. I mentioned DNRs or DEQs. I'll show you a list of some partners here in a little bit. Whatever the state agency is in your state that either governs natural resources or environmental quality or environmental protection, there's a lot of different names. In Washington State, it's the Department of Ecology. They're all willing to help, and really it's just a matter of knowing who those contacts are and using them. Your best source of information is always going to be your driller, the person who installed your well or who has done the work on your pump. They should be the most familiar with your well and other wells in the area. Drillers are very territorial generally. They don't travel out of state or 100 miles away to drill unless there's a real special need. And so they've likely drilled many wells near where your well is and understand where the aquifers are, if there's any water quality issues that are naturally occurring, or any other issues like local conditions or laws that may govern things. So, for instance, in most of the country, a public water supply is considered any facility that has at least 15 connections. So if we had a call from a gentleman in Wyoming, someone had told him that if you had more than 3 wells or more than 3 homes on your well, that there were special provisions in Wyoming that required you to get a permit. We contacted the primacy agency and the state groundwater folks at their Department of Environmental Quality, and that's not true. It's the same law as in most of the country. Unless there's 15 connections on that well, it's not a public water supply. The difference is some states do have unique laws. Washington State, for example, they at least track systems that even have 2 homes on a well, and they're considered a special case, a small system, and there's some requirements that go along with that, at least for reporting. So the other things about your driller, they should have a log. If they haven't given that to you, if you don't have a file with all your well information, they should be able to give you that. And as I said, they should know the general water quality and well depths and issues with the aquifers in your area. They should be able to tell you who to go to for sampling and refer you to the other best sources for help in the area. They sometimes are stumped too, and who do they call at the State Geological Survey or at the State DNR, whoever, they can give you that information. And so if you know who drilled your well, that's probably your best source for most of your information. Your driller's as important to you as your dentist or your doctor. You need to develop a relationship with them if you can. If you don't know, and that's a lot of cases, folks don't know who drilled their well, they don't know how old their well is, they don't know how deep it is. Many wells were drilled before there were any laws on the books that required a driller to file a log with the state. And so for instance in Illinois that law was passed in the 60s, but in some states like Nebraska it wasn't until 1986. So any well drilled in Nebraska before 1986 probably doesn't have a log on file with the state, and that's probably 3/4 to more of all the wells in the state. In Illinois, it's probably, in some places it's more than half, in some cases it's less than half. We do a lot of work here either measuring wells or collecting samples in rural areas, and a lot of times we have about half the logs or a little more than half in our files. But if you don't know, then the thing to do is, it may be that there is a log on file. You may not have been the original landowner, and so you need to search. There are a lot of ways to search for things. Here's an example on Google. I just said Missouri water well logs. the Department of Natural Resources comes up. They actually in Missouri are both the private well and community water supply stewards, if you will, for the state. And you can see they have things online, Missouri well logs by county, and so you might be able to find information there. You'll need to know your legal description, which is a township range, a tier, range, and section for your property, or in some cases a parcel number. There's a lot of variability there. Your best bet is to call, go to this website, find someone to contact, and have them walk you through it, because they will help you. And this varies by state. In Missouri, it's DNR. In Illinois, it's both the State Geological Survey and the State Water Survey, which are both at the University of Illinois. In Washington State, it's the Department of Ecology. You just need to search in your state or area and see who might have those logs. If you don't know your driller. And be inquisitive. There are maps like the USGS, the small maps at the bottom. The last one of the United States is a USGS map that shows all the major aquifers in the country. That's helpful to some degree, but many wells are not on a major aquifer. They're on some small single unit aquifer that may be along a river valley or between two mountain ranges or whatever. And so if you look for that information, there's a map. There might be a map available, or the agency that can find those things for you. So in Oklahoma, their Water Resources Board probably would be a good source to go to for that information. Your best local sources, again, your driller or your contractor should be your first step if you can. Also ask your neighbors. If you don't know anything about your well and you don't have a well driller, maybe you just moved onto a property and you know nothing about it, talk to your neighbors and find out who the well drillers in the area are, or contact the local drillers that you see, and maybe one of them will know, oh yeah, S&K Drilling drilled that well 25 years ago. And from there you can go to your health department. In Illinois, at least, the health department maintains all the well logs for each county, and they forward them to us, and so they may have information. And that's not just well log information, but also then if you have any water quality concerns or want to get a water sample tested, your health department will be able to tell you if they do it, if they have a state lab that they can send it to, or if they recommend a private lab that might be in the area to do the sampling. County extension, if you're in a rural area, extension is in every state in the country, and if in some states, like in Pennsylvania, they have a master well owner program where they have staff dedicated to working in all the counties. The lead for that in Pennsylvania, his name is Brian Swistock, has a tremendous program. They've worked with over 40,000 private well owners in the last 20 years. And in other states, like in Illinois, we don't have a master well owner program, but we do have some regional extension staff who are focused on private well issues. And so if you talk to your county and that person isn't as knowledgeable about private wells, they will forward that on up the chain to a regional person who can then help you. In some states, that role is played by the soil and water conservation districts. They offer sampling or they provide resources for well owners. That doesn't happen in Illinois per se, but I know folks have told us that in some states their soil and water conservation district who has helped them with their well issues. Just some other suggestions, townships, and that depends on the township. Where I grew up, which was a very rural area, our township had a commissioner who maintained the roads. I never got involved with any of these other issues. But in some townships that may be in more populated counties, in Illinois, I'm thinking of the collar counties, for instance, in the Chicago area, where the township actually has a staff and a budget. They may offer some of those sorts of information or track that so that it's available. Local groups, I'm going to show you an example, but you never know what others have done to either protect groundwater or protect, wetlands and fens and nature preserve areas, or have organized because of a chemical plan or for a lot of reasons. There are local environmental groups that may start out based on one cause or one issue, but eventually branch out and start trying to do more to educate the folks in their area. And the example I'm going to give you is BACOG, and I use them a lot, and they're up by the Chicago area, but it's Barrington Area Council of Governments. They started out over 10 years ago looking at protecting wetlands in their area from development and some other issues. They have developed a groundwater plan. They've mapped all their groundwater resources. This is an event they held last year where they had water quality testing. That was, I believe it was free. In some cases it's free, or some cases it's reduced. It looks like there's a reduced price of $10. And they work with their county health departments. They've become a local voice for a 3-county area up there that really tries to educate all their private well owners so they understand, what their aquifers mean and how those affect all the wetlands and the ecology of the area. And I just got this in the mail yesterday. They're holding a meeting on Tuesday, November 18th in Barrington, and they're having 2 or 3 speakers come in and talk about issues. One's a well driller and one's a treatment person about their water and how to maintain their well. So just public service activities that this local group's doing to help inform, they see the value in, it only takes one well owner who doesn't understand how critical their well is and pours, an ag chemical down their well to get rid of it, that can contaminate all their neighbors and all those sorts of things. So the more education, and they're doing it the right way. They're using science and not being alarmist in some of those things. So, okay, other sources. Moving up basically to state agencies or tribal departments of health. Those folks oversee many of the county health departments, or a local health department, if you will, in some cases. And a lot of times that's where the lab might be. And some states that have county labs that are able to do analysis, they do. But in a state like Illinois, or in most states, I'm sure, not every county health department has that capability. And so they're overarching the role, like in Illinois. The State Department of Public Health oversees well construction guidelines and drilling guidelines and all those things, as well as supports all their county health departments. The agencies that regulate drillers in construction, and I've actually listed those here in the 5th bullet: DNR, DEQ, DEP, DOA, DHHS. These are all different states that have these different agencies. So DOE stands for Department of Ecology, Department of Water Resources, Health and Human Services, Department of Ag, Environmental Protection. Every state, by statute has created these agencies that have different roles. And so in Illinois, it's the DNR oversees a lot of the source water type issues, water planning, protecting resources, and it's the state scientific surveys and public health that manage well logs and that information. The State Extension Office, again, if you don't know your county extension agent, or you're not in, you're in another area, they can provide some information. And I said state scientific surveys here. Every state but Illinois and Oklahoma do not have a state water survey. There are 2 in the country, and the Oklahoma one's pretty new. In most states, it's a DNR or a state geological survey that keeps track of, mapping aquifers and ambient water quality, which means the natural water quality of aquifers, and doing the mapping and modeling and determining how future development might affect things. And so your scientific surveys are a wealth of information on the resource and the geology. And like here, if a well owner were to call me and say, I just bought this property, it's in Township 20 North, Range 7 West, Section 6 in Champaign County, I want to put a well in and build a house. What do I need to do? And the first thing I would do is pull up all the well logs for that section and nearby sections and say, well, it looks like you're over the Muhammad Aquifer, which is about 250 feet deep from land surface. It's going to be hard with a lot of iron, but it's a good source. It's protected from the surface. Yeah, and then we have a list of all the drillers in the state. We don't play favorites there. We just hand them a list and say, here's where they're all located, and here's what you need to do. We also have a lot of water quality information because we have a public service lab. And so in most cases, if it's not because of something like our public service lab, where we're collecting samples from the public regularly, private well owners, then there's research studies. Like a state geological survey does a lot of research looking at different aquifers and that sort of thing. So they have water quality information that may be from private wells or even monitoring wells that would at least help identify, if there's arsenic in your aquifer or uranium or other things that are naturally occurring. So some other sources, analytical labs. Some of the labs at least that we've dealt with, private labs, many of the community water supplies actually use them on a regular basis. The one thing about a lab, if they've been doing this a long time, they also understand, especially in their local area, some of the issues related to the aquifers and that sort of thing. One thing I forgot to put in here is you should always make sure, if you're going to use a lab, find a lab that's EPA certified if you can, or that's a state lab, just to ensure that there's a quality assurance of the results you're getting and those sorts of things. And some other sources, there are water well associations, there are septic installers and associations, and many states have a groundwater association that can give you information, at least for like local drillers and that sort of thing. Okay, these are just a couple examples. California, as we've all heard or seen on the news, is in the middle of a drought, and we've had well owners contact us from different areas in California where they have to wait 6 months to a year for a driller to even have time to come drill them a deeper well, because that's how many wells are being re-drilled. And so there are a lot of resources available, and California just changed some of their laws. But depending on what you're after, again, be creative when you're searching on the internet, and you can probably find a lot of good information about your area. One other topic is financial assistance. There are programs out there that can help a well owner either drill a well or upgrade their well or add treatment if they have a known contaminant. They're few and far between, and a lot of them are income dependent. They're for low income folks, but they're worth looking into. And things like if you have an old dug well, or you have a well pit, which a lot of those were grandfathered in when the regulations for well construction were changed, that need to be fixed or brought up to code, or even an abandoned well on your property. We estimate there are about 500,000 active wells in Illinois, and there's probably somewhere between 1 and 2 million abandoned wells that aren't plugged, that are just out there and a risk both to the aquifer and to personal health and safety, because you hear stories of people falling in old wells all the time. It may not make national news. Sometimes it does, but there are a lot of wells out there that need to be fixed, and it's kind of expensive, and so these programs can help with that. I know Iowa has a Grants to Counties program where their county health departments get funding from their state legislature to either provide free testing or for doing a cost share for abandoning wells, and it's those kind of things that your county might be able to tell you about. NGWA is the National Groundwater Association, and they have a resource page for financial assistance, and I'll show that in a second. And you can also contact your county or state or territory, the agencies there, to see if anyone might know of a program that's available for helping cost some of these things out if you need help. This is the wellowner.org page I mentioned, and this image that I'm using is probably a little dated. I think at the bottom where it says nonprofit organizations offering low-interest loans, that used to be a clickable icon, and now it's got a contact from someone at USDA. But if wellowner.org is a great site for basic information for well owners. They have a pretty robust program. And National Groundwater Association supports the drillers, scientists, and engineers, and the contractors, and some of the vendors that put in private wells. I'm a member. I've been a member for quite a while, and I serve on some of their committees. Their whole role is to support the industry of private wells and even community well and well development. So they've been around for a long time. They're pretty respected, and they have a lot of good resources on this wellowner.org page, which was set up just to be a site for the public to go to. But you can see they have this rural housing repair and rehabilitation loan program that's funded through USDA. It doesn't serve the entire country. They have nonprofit groups that apply for some of their funds, and then they offer those to well owners at a 1% loan. That's I believe it's up to $11,000 over a 20-year period. So it's a pretty good deal if you're in a situation where you need a new well but you can't afford it. You might be able to use this program. And what I've done, I contacted Joyce Taylor at Rural Utility Service, and she's the contact that they list on the wellowner.org page now. And she gave me a partial list of some of the nonprofits that offer help. This is her contact information. Sorry about that. And from the list she gave me, these are the states at the bottom that had programs that were active this year. It changes from year to year. I'm not sure Illinois is active this year, but there was a group that I have the name of and I didn't include that had funding, I believe, last year, and it's in Western Illinois. But they can provide these loans if they're available to residents in that state or in a particular territory. And a lot of times they're focused like in Appalachia or other areas where there might be a larger percentage of low-income folks. It's meant to help keep the rural way of life going and all those sorts of things. So it's a pretty good program. So I wanted to mention we've got a phone number and an email address so people can call us, and we've gotten a lot of questions about specific things in a given state. The guy in Wyoming I mentioned earlier, he said, I went to our state DEQ page and I contacted, I went through everything on the web and I could find nothing related to how many wells can be on or how many homes can be on a well. So he did his due diligence, and then he went looking for help, and he found our website and he contacted me, and we were able to make 2 phone calls and solve his problem. If you haven't signed up for our class, that's the first thing you need to do. You need to take the class because it gives you a lot of these tools that you need and a better understanding on why it's important you understand how your well works and why your pump might be cycling, or if your well is in a pit and buried, why that may not be the way you want to maintain that for the future. And so our role is to help you understand what's available to you and start you down the path to becoming a better steward, if you will, of your well. We liken it to, community water operator who runs a small system is in charge of ensuring public health for all the citizens that he serves. Every private well owner is basically a small system operator in that they're responsible for their family or the folks that live with them or maybe they share water with, and ensuring that both their health is protected and also that they're protecting the aquifer and the resource. If something's done to contaminate a particular well, it could travel through the aquifer to another well or cause more issues for other people, so there's a responsibility there. And we try to give you all those tools to understand how water flows through the ground and into your well and how your well works, and all the way through how to protect you from, if you need treatment, how to make sure that you're getting the right treatment and not treatment you don't need that may be really expensive. So we want to help you find information, and again, what we're trying to do is give everyone tools to understand how they can figure this stuff out on their own. So we usually provide answers to general questions, about wells and water quality or solving a problem, but we do get a lot of specific questions that we end up, someone asked me a question in the state of Washington, and it was very specific about their regulations. And that's for their Department of Ecology to answer. And so, I went to them and said, do you mind if I forward your email to the Department of Ecology? And they didn't, and so that's what we've done. We're not here to do all the legwork for everybody, but try to get people and match them up with the right source of local information or in their area so that they can find what they need. So, that said, we're going to take a short break. I don't know how many questions we've received during I'm being told 4. So give us a minute or 2 to get those up on the screen, and then we'll come back and go through. We've probably got 8 or 10 questions that we received prior to the webinar, and we'll go through those, and hopefully we can answer the ones we received today. So hang on, and we'll be back. All right, I'm going to get started, and we had 4 questions, and I will get to those. First, though, I'm going to go through the questions that we had previously, at least the ones I can answer, and relied on a few colleagues and other professionals to answer a few of these as well. And if you can't hear me or see this change, I guess I need Jennifer to let me know. Okay, so the first question we got was, does the U of I conduct extensive analysis like for pesticides? And this is someone who had a shallow dug well and were concerned. I asked, I wasn't sure specifically on campus if anyone did a lot of that work. Our lab does not. We just do inorganics and metals. And what everyone suggested is that on the Illinois EPA's webpage, they have a well water page. If you look on the right here, and there's a list of accredited labs there. And it gives you all the contact information for each one, and it lists like those that just do biological or bacterial testing, and those that do just metals or whatever, and those that do the full range of testing. And so if you just Google Illinois EPA well water, this page should come up, and you can click on this list on the right. And the same way in every state. You don't need to Google Illinois EPA, but maybe it's, in Minnesota, it'd be Minnesota Department of Health, and they would have information about their labs. And I know the US EPA also has a list of accredited labs for public water systems that they can use for their analyses for compliance sampling. So, every community water supply has to meet certain standards for their water quality, and they have to use an accredited lab. And so there's a list of those for the whole country. And, in the end, some labs may cost a little more, but it's important to use a lab that is either recommended by, a neutral party, or, is certified either in the state or by EPA, so that there's quality assurance there that they know what they're doing and those sorts of things. And, it doesn't happen a lot, but I know there was a study that Ohio EPA conducted about 10 years ago where they sent samples that they created to all the different labs, and they actually got a fair amount of variety from a couple labs and made them go through some extra hoops to work on their process and make sure they were doing things the right way. So it is better to use in a lab that's accredited. They can show that they do things the right way. Our area is facing the possibility of an underground coal mine, and people in the area would like to get pre-mine data on their groundwater and wells. What do you recommend? I'm not a geologist. I'm a civil engineer, and so I contacted Dr. Ed Maynard at the State Geological Survey here in Illinois, and he said, the first thing to do, he's assuming that you're not in Illinois. If you are, let me know, and I will get you in touch with Ed, because he is the person to talk to. But he suggested the first thing to do is to contact the State Geological Survey in your state to determine the general geologic setting. And, it depends on how deep the coal mine is planned to be and where people are already obtaining their groundwater. It could be that there's a lot of space, or if you will, and it may not be a factor versus, it depends on the vertical distance and some of those things. And it may not impact things at all. Underground coal mines can cause subsidence issues, and that can depends on the technique they use, which I'm not going to get into that stuff because that's something for an expert to describe. But in cases where if the coal mine has to be dewatered because of the aquifer, then you should have a concern about the water levels in your well going down. And so it's certainly worthwhile to collect water level information and track that in your well. In our lessons, one of the things we recommend under best practices is that you install a 1-inch piezometer tube when you have your well drilled, so that you can measure the water level without having to put a steel tape or some other device down the middle of your well where your pump is. The only state that I know of that actually requires that with new construction is Oregon, and it's a great idea. It's a little more expensive, but it's a way to provide both the well owner can measure the water level in their own well, or a state person or a county person can as well, without any risk to opening up the wellhead and introducing possible contamination and that sort of thing. So if you would email us, I can send you the email we got from Ed or anybody else that's interested, and really the thing to do is to talk to your State Geological Survey. There's no information available at the depth and location of my well. What are some cost-effective options to discover this information? So in this case, we're assuming this is a person who has a buried well. Their well is, and that happens. We find wells that are under the garage. It's buried in a pit, and they just put a concrete slab right over the top of the whole thing, which is, really not very smart, because there's no way to access it if something goes wrong, and all those sorts of things. So I contacted Jim Layton, who's with Kickapoo Drilling, which is in Downs. It's about 30 miles from here. He's someone who's drilled for a long time and has been very active in state issues. And, he suggested that I'm going to find his notes here. The first thing to do is to take apart the plumbing, and if you can locate a wire that comes into the house, you can charge that, so to speak, and then you can use a device to follow that out to your well. If that's not possible, you can determine where your pipe is coming out of your house, and worst case would be that you dig that up and then follow it, and that's certainly not ideal. But I don't think you can get a camera through your horizontal pipe to get to your well. You can snake a water line with something on the end of it and hope you could hear it out where you think your well is. But the bottom line is, if you do whatever you do, once you find your well, you need to, like in Illinois, you'd be required then to put a pitless adapter so that it comes up to the surface, and it's probably what you'd want anyway. So yeah, there are a lot of those wells, unfortunately, that are just somebody buried it, assume they'd never need to do anything with it again, and the person who ends up at that home ends up with a real mess at some point. So I can't find records for the 18 wells in this small development where I live. How do I find out? As I said here, I've hopefully answered that question, but it's, talk to your county health department, talk to your state agency that regulates well construction, and talk to the local drillers and see, if depending on how old the development is, if you talk to a couple of local drillers, they will know who put those wells in. If it's an 18, because they got a contract to do all 18 wells, I would guess. And so you just need to find out who actually constructed the well, or if your state has those records. And a lot of states, like in Illinois, I meant to provide a picture with this, but if in Illinois, our State Geological Survey has this really cool online tool that you can go in, and it's under the private well thing, and you can tell the location, and it'll pull up all the wells and show a map, and you click on one of them and it gives you the log, or at least a log that they've created based on the geology and all those things. So there's a lot of tools out there. It's mainly finding the right person, and whoever regulates well construction in your state will be able to tell you who can see if that information is available. And in some cases, we ran across areas where we just did a study for the city of Bloomington. We went out to an area and we inventoried 141 wells in 14 square miles, and it turned out we only had logs on file for about 40. And it turned out it's one particular driller is not very good about filing his logs, and that's a shame, but that's what happens in some cases as well. I live in Saget County, Washington, and can find no information on my well. What do you do? Well, and when you're out west, for those of you who are not familiar with being with the West, a lot of the states there have water rights issues such that you can go buy 5 acres of property and put a house on it, but you may not be able to put in a well or use water from that well because you don't have a prior right. And so this is a real problem, and I contacted the State Department of Ecology in Washington State, and I'm waiting on a response. And I will follow up, and if you're on this, the person who asked this question is on the webinar, please email us. One of the problems with our Ask Questions for our webinar page, it doesn't have a place for an email, and some people have given us their email and some haven't. But if you will email info@privatewellclass.org, we will follow up and try to help get you to the right person that might be able to provide some answers. I have a 30-foot deep hand-dug well, and they want to try to deepen it so they can have more volume, I'm assuming. And it says it's inaccessible to well drilling. I asked Jim Layton about this too, and his big question was, why is it inaccessible? I mean, I understand there are a lot of reasons. It could be that a tree is growing up right next to it. Now you can't get a rig over top of the well, or it could be that it's in a basement. There are wells that are actually, and they put the well in, then put the house around it. But jetting, I don't know if it really could be done or not. It really depends on the material, but logistically it seems like a very difficult way to try to gain a little bit of volume. I don't know how you get the material out of the well. I would say there's a lot of problems that you could have trying to do something like that. So it's not very likely that you could do anything that was productive by trying to jet a hole in the bottom of your dug well. Constant pressure. So in our class in lesson 4, we talk about pumps and pressure tanks and all the things that make up the infrastructure for a private water system. And there's a section on variable speed drives, and those are kind of a newer phenomena. I'm actually not familiar with them at all, but I do know their entire purpose is to maintain constant pressure. By far, when you talk to someone who works with private well owners regularly, especially like at a county health department or a state health department, they'll say that the biggest complaint people have is that they can't maintain pressure whenever they're doing their laundry and trying to take a shower or whatever. And so these variable speed drives, they're pumps that can run at different RPMs based on maintaining that constant pressure. So when there's a lot of use, it revs up and pushes more water into the house to keep the pressure up. When there's just a little use, it either isn't running or it's using the pressure tank to maintain the pressure until a certain point, or it's running slower because it's just replacing the amount of water to keep the pressure constant. So you can ask a well driller or a contractor or a pump installer about a variable speed drive and what that might cost and see if it'll solve your problem. They would probably be more aware of be able to look at your specific situation and tell you the best way to go there. So, and some drillers and contractors aren't even using those yet, I don't think. So, yeah, there is a way. We have a low capacity well. How does the second pressure tank help with low capacity? Is that my only option besides drilling again? There are a lot of places in the country where there just is not much water. And, there's places in Pennsylvania where I know when they run their washer or their shower, it may, when their pump kicks on, it may lower the water level in their well 100 feet. And in other places, you can pump, there's sand and gravel aquifers here in Illinois where you could pump 500 gallons a minute, and it won't lower the water level in the well more than 10 feet. And so it really just depends on the aquifer and how, quote, good it is as far as what it'll produce. But the whole point, in most low capacity wells, you have a larger pressure tank or a very large pressure tank with the idea that when everybody's sleeping and when it's not in use during the day because everybody's gone, it can fill up and then provide water for those times when you are there. So a second pressure tank isn't there's really no advantage to having just a larger tank, but the bottom line is if you have a very low capacity well, you need to have storage capacity so that you have water when you need it. We sampled a well that is a bedrock well here in Illinois. They had a 500-gallon tank hooked into their system so that they could store water there during the evening or during the night or whatever, so that it was available to use when everybody was taking showers in the morning. And that's the bottom line, is you have to store water. You're only pumping in 2 gallons a minute. That's if it pumped continually at 2 gallons a minute, that's 2,800 gallons a day, almost 2,900 gallons a day. So that's more than a house would use on a regular day. So you can at least have enough water. It's just a matter of having the storage capacity that you can do those things. So the best system to install to remove sulfur from my well water. Well, I asked our public service lab, and Dan Webb is a supervisor, about sulfur. We have a lot of sulfur here too in Illinois, and actually, my brother-in-law has a real problem with sulfur in their well, so we've tried to help him there. But their solution is, first you should try a single dose, a shot chlorination. Most researchers and scientists feel that sulfur's coming from bacteria, using the source material, the rock, to release the sulfur and that smell, and so chlorination should kill the bacteria. The problem is bacteria are ubiquitous in groundwater. They're everywhere, and they really are, depending on the chemistry, what kind of bacteria you might have. And so a lot of times they'll come back. And so if that's the case, they do have continuous chlorinators, and they're basically like a big, the ones I've seen are more like a big 5-gallon jug that drops a pellet in your well, and it sits on top of your well every so often and keeps that in some kind of equilibrium. So I would talk to a local lab and your county health department and see what they suggest, but that's what our lab suggested. We've had a couple questions about lowering pumps versus, I said lowering wells, I meant drilling a new well. And also this person asked 2 questions, one about that, is it worth the expense of lowering a pump? And we're talking wells that are 500 or 600 feet deep already. versus drilling a new well. It really depends on the situation. I helped a well owner in California who had a well that was about 450 feet deep, and their pump was set at 300. And so their well would stop running, stop working, and break suction because the water level had dropped to that 300 feet after about 45 minutes of running it. So, in that case, they could lower their pump. They had probably had at least 100 feet they could lower their pump, and they were likely to solve their problem at least for a while until groundwater levels continue to go lower. And that's the problem in California, is as long as this drought continues and there's so much water use, wells they drilled 4 years ago in a particular area at 450 feet, now they're going down to 700 feet or 650 because the water levels have dropped that much. So it really depends on the specifics of the well. That's the bottom line, and we'd need to know details, and we'd probably want someone locally to help with that. But I would guess that lowering your pump is much less expensive if you have the depth below your well, below your pump. If you have some good vertical distance between the bottom of your well and where your pump's set, it's probably cheaper to lower your pump. And if you're close already, then probably lowering your pump isn't going to do much for you. So the other question was about educational programs in California. And, RCAC is the regional partner for RCAP, which is who actually funds, where our funding comes through them. And they're actually one, and I was just told this last week, even though USDA didn't mention them, that they have a program for providing funds for well owners. And if you are interested in that and you're in California, email me at info@privatewellclass.org, and I will follow up with you and get you in contact with them. Because I talked to their environmental programs manager, and they're interested in helping well owners as much as they can. They have these low interest loans to provide, and part of our grant for this year with US EPA calls for having workshops using RCAP staff in different parts of the country. And if you're not familiar with RCAP, they're a national technical assistance provider. They have a national office with a few staff, but 6 regional affiliates, and RCAC is their Western RCAP, and they cover 11 states and have, at least 100, if not more, employees that provide technical assistance mostly to communities, but also to private well owners. And so we are talking about possibly trying to conduct a workshop in one of these areas, like the person who emailed us these questions, because it would certainly be a benefit, and there are a lot of issues there, as I understand it, about the problems with the water quality there, and also, water system versus private wells. But one thing I can tell you is that third line there, everyone should be taking this class just to have better familiarity with what issues there are related to private wells. And if you're talking about developing an educational program for residents that use private wells, there is one. The private well class has been vetted through almost every state and accepted, and we've been very fortunate that it's a lot of state agencies and other folks that are in the groundwater industry have came back and said that this is a really good program, and we recommend well owners take it. So we certainly think that's where you should go first. So we had a number of questions. How often should I have my well tested, and what should I test for, and how do I get my well water tested? And so this is actually from a webinar we did last year, and having those questions come up now is one of the reasons why I said I think there are people on the webinar that haven't taken our class. And so I want to reiterate, a lot of this stuff is described in more detail if you go through the 10 lessons that we provide, and it walks you through a lot of these things. So I've got 3 slides here that answer those questions, on best practices, what you need to do. You should always use a licensed driller, someone who's reputable, that you ask around and understand, especially if you're drilling a new well or having work done and you don't have someone that you know and trust. Drillers can be certified by NGWA. That's always a good thing. And so some of the other things you need to do, inspect your wellhead at least annually, and that means your well, if it's PVC especially, may stick up a foot or 2 foot or a little more. I know when I was a kid on a farm, if I was on a riding mower, I was in high gear the whole time, and it only takes one time nicking that with the cover, the metal cover that that spits out all the grass or whatever, to pop a hole in that, and now you've created an avenue for bacteria or bugs or other things to get in your well. Some of these other things, I just left this up here because they are best practices, and that's not really the question, I guess, but sample your well annually. That's what we recommend. And getting to that, you should sample your well once a year, at least for coliform and nitrate, and the reason is those indicate a possible pathway to your well. You know, you may have coliform in your well and it doesn't hurt anything. It doesn't make people sick necessarily, but it means that, you know, how did it get in there? That means there might be a pathway into your well, and you need to be concerned that there's a breach or your well casing has got a crack or those sorts of things. Anytime you open your well, you should have it, you should test it. Anything can be introduced. I mean, we've opened wells that have had spiders to frogs to dead rodents, and the people had no idea, and they just assume their water's fine, but there are a lot of horror stories like that, and so you need to be aware and make sure your well's sealed properly so that nothing can get in. And if it's not, if it's an old dug well with planks over it, we see a lot of those. You know, you need to consider possibly putting in a different kind of well or having your well tested much more often, that sort of thing. Anytime you notice a change in color, taste, or odor, and then, or if you've had to chlorinate or disinfect because of an issue, you should obviously, once you've done that, don't just assume that it's safe, then go test it to make sure that it's taking care of the problem, because a lot of times there's a reoccurring reason for that bacteria getting in your well, and one-time chlorination isn't necessarily going to fix it. You need to find the source or what's causing that. If there's illness or new baby, that a new baby or someone pregnant, that's related to nitrate, blue baby syndrome, which is you know, the nitrite replacing the oxygen in your bloodstream. It's called blue baby syndrome because you basically suffocate, and it's really risky for pregnant mothers that are for their unborn child, and infants that aren't old enough to break down that in their stomachs yet. And you develop adults it doesn't really affect, or older children. It's just newborns and that sort of thing. Or if your neighbor's got a similar well to you, you know, and they have some kind of issue that's come up, that's a good time to also test your well. Here's a list of what we recommend to sample for, but always talk to your local health department about not only concerns that they might have. Maybe you're in an area that's got high arsenic, or, you know, it's an agricultural area and there's been a lot of nitrate in some of the wells, but also ask them what they recommend. You know, we have our own list, and we used our public service lab to help determine that, and I didn't provide the full list. It's actually in our lesson, but if you're the first time you're going to test it, this is something you should probably do annually, is coliform nitrate and pH and hardness, because even pH and hardness, if you notice a change from one year to the next, there shouldn't be, and that indicates that there may be something going on with your well. One of the other things our lab does is they take a sample that's pre-treatment and post-treatment, so to speak. So they want folks to, when they send samples to us, to collect one that's prior to any treatment, so before a filter or a softener or any other kind of treatment device, and then one after. And, you know, interestingly enough, we've used that data to find some really cool things, like even though a softener, you know, is not meant to take out arsenic, we found that 42% of the arsenic was removed from about 100 wells. Well, from 100 sets of samples, just having a softener where they had a significant amount of arsenic, about 42% was taken out on average, just because of the particular chemistry in this aquifer. And that doesn't hold everywhere. In fact, you know, some it was 0 and some it was nearly 100%. It just depends on the chemistry and how that all interacts, and, you know, the other constituents in the water. But you never know what trying to do one thing may do to help or hurt another. You know, for instance, iron, when it precipitates, whenever water with iron in it hits air, it precipitates out, while arsenic co-precipitates with it. So a lot of community water supplies rely on iron removal to help remove the arsenic that they need to remove as well. And so it's just a benefit that you can't anticipate, but sometimes it happens. Okay, so that's all the presentation, but I'm going to click on this to show I don't know if everybody can read that. I probably should make those a little bigger. Hang on one second here. Okay. Okay, so we've had a few more questions since I looked at our break. And so, yeah, the person from Southwest Vermilion County, if you just contact me, I'll get you in touch with Ed Maynard. That's the best way to go. I have a vacation home in cold climate. Would it hurt anything to wrap, pump, and installation? You know, I would ask a driller, or a pump installer. You know, I'm not an installer per se, and I haven't worked in the field. You need to be careful that your pump doesn't get too hot. Obviously, it's not going to be used whenever you're not there, but I would just ask them the best approach. You know, we had a well house that we kept heated during the winter, so if our power went out, not only did we lose water because of no electricity, but then our pipes would freeze, and it was a shallow dug well, and it caused all kinds of problems. So I would ask someone, even your state Department of Health can probably give you some good guidelines. I know there's a lot of issues these days with seasonal homes. There are communities, I know there's one in New Hampshire that we've dealt with where almost all the homes are vacation homes, and so they're only used part of the year, and that really affects the chemistry when that water sits in those pipes for so long and isn't turned over. And so there are some guidelines out for how to best, you know, for startup and preparing your system for its winter break or summer break or whatever. And if you email me, I'll try to find those. I know there are a couple that exist just with some best practices, and I don't know if this specifically is addressed, but it's a good idea to, you know, there's things you can do to, you know, put your home up for the winter, so to speak. So, are you hearing agencies meeting lots of resistance from private well folks being willing to learn and respond to quality concerns? Any suggestions on how to handle this? Well, well owners are an independent group by nature, and mostly in rural areas, and we actually have done a lot of work with this project and with some others that we have, trying to look at best practices for reaching out to well owners and trying to get them to understand how important it is that they sample their well, or even being concerned. And the best example I can give you, and if you've been on one of these talks before, I apologize. When I was in college, I was already working at the water survey, and we had an old hand-dug well, 14 feet deep, uncemented brick, and we had all kinds of issues with it. But one weekend I came home from college. I was a senior, and I'd already worked here for 2 or 3 years. And my dad said, "Don't tell Mom, but we got frogs in our well." And his solution was to try to put a barb on the end of a chimney rod and gig the frogs out of this well and call it good. And so, we didn't do that. We pumped it dry. We took a pressure washer and used chlorinated water we actually got down in the well and sprayed the entire thing down and ran it through the pipes and did, the whole thing you're supposed to do when you disinfect your lines once they've been contaminated. But my dad never, one time ever, would he ever admit that city water was better than well water, no matter what happened. It's just a feeling that well protects you, and groundwater's protected, and when you live out in the country, that's, that sort of thing. So to get to your question, I guess, I apologize, we're doing a project for CDC where we've evaluated and we've sent a survey out to about 100 different programs around the country that work with well owners. A lot of them are county health departments that do testing, and we're developing a report and basically a best practices manual on here are some novel ideas, here are ways to engage well owners and try to get them more interested in understanding what's going on with their wells and why they need to understand how important it is that they actually do something with their wells. That's not due till January 31, and it probably won't be done till about then, maybe a little before, but we do have some information, and we are going to come up with some suggestions on trying to better engage well owners to participate. There's a really good report, or actually it's a poster that was done in Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Michigan by Extension and a nursing school, and I can't remember the third one, a Department of Health maybe, where they sent out questionnaires to 2,700 well owners in 6 rural counties in those states. And they asked them why they, I think over they got 1,700 responses, and 1,100 of those had not ever sampled, and they gave a myriad of reasons. But a lot of them I didn't know I was supposed to sample, all the way down to I don't want to know what's in my well. 8% of those 1,100 people said I don't want to know what's in my well. And so, I don't know how you get past those sorts of things, but if you'll email me, actually you don't need to do that even. If you go on the private well class website and click on resources, there is one of the resources, and I can't tell you which lesson it is, maybe lesson 6 or 8. There is a clickable PowerPoint, I believe. It's a big poster that was done, and the lead author's name is Lucan, and I can't spell that, but it's Luikk. You'll notice it when you see it. But if you look at that poster, it's all about well owner attitudes and why they don't test and what they found. And they did a really unique survey where they actually put $2 bills in a bunch of these and sent them, and they got different responses based on what kind of incentives they gave people. So it was a research project. But the next one says, really, really need something like this loan program in Central California. Have you heard of any? Hopefully I've already answered that. RCAC is the group to talk to, and I can give you the person's name that I deal with there, who I did share the information. Someone else, if it's someone different from California, gave us about the issues they're having, and just because that's how I found out they have a loan program. So yeah, if you would contact me, or even, like I said, email us, and we can start a dialogue there, and I could hook you up with the right people. At the end, I will put Joyce's email address back up, and do me a favor, everyone on this call, hopefully all 100 of you or however many, I guess there's not that many, but don't email her all today. She probably won't like me very much if that happened, but yeah. Is privacy of private wells an issue in all states? It's very different in every state. In California, your well log is protected by law. When one of the well owners there wanted me to see their log, they eventually had to scan it and email it to me because the county government that had it wouldn't share it. And in Illinois, you can get online and go to the Geological Survey or the Water Survey site, and you can actually pull up a scan of the actual log, no issue whatsoever. So it varies, and I don't know all the rules in each state as far as who, there's just more law in California. You have water rights issues, and same with like Oregon and Washington and many of the western states. They do things like regulate rain barrels. You can, in Colorado, you can be fined for having a rain barrel because you're preventing water from getting in the Colorado River, and that's all protected by treaty with Mexico and everything else. So it just depends on where you're at. And so I would ask your state what their rules are. So at the conclusion of the class, do you offer any certificate to attendees who have successfully completed all the lessons and other information? We don't. And we've had this question a lot. So many times it's sanitarians who are the people out on the front line inspecting wells and that sort of thing who've went through this class. And a lot of them emailed us about how much they appreciate the class and what they've learned, but we do not have any kind of certificate. The idea here is we're actually, the approach we took was to support private well owners first and foremost. That said, we have applied for more funding from US EPA, and we don't know until sometime next spring whether or not we've gotten it. But we have talked to NEHA, the National Environmental Health Association, and if we do get funding, one of the things we're going to develop is a version of this class that can go on their e-learning center so that sanitarians can take the class, and for each lesson there'll be a quiz and they can get CEUs. And as far as folks just wanting a certificate, who is a private well owner, to say they went through it, I guess I've really not had that question. If you are just a private well owner and not interested for any professional reason, we do also hope to provide a version of this down the road that would be beneficial for non-community water systems. So those are the schools and daycares and restaurants and rest areas and all the places that serve water to people and not their own, so to speak, but that are not considered a community water supply. And so, that's all speculative, if you will, for now. But I guess the short answer is there probably won't be a certificate for an attendee who just wants to have their certificate. And we could, I guess, develop something like that, but that hasn't come up before. So if you have more thoughts on that, I'd appreciate an email and we can discuss it. I don't want to belittle it at all. I just want to understand where you're coming from, I guess. So that's all the questions we have, and so I'm going to, I believe I got out. No, I didn't. I'm going to go back to that page. And put that up. And I'll leave this up for a few minutes. And I guess that's all we have for today. I appreciate everyone who stayed on the call. We have, it's about 2:15, so I think we're doing pretty good. And if you have any other questions, you can email us. There's also a phone number on our webpage, which we certainly, we operate during business hours, so to speak, between 9 and 5 Central Time. And yeah, thank you.